Hello, everyone. Uh, my name is Aditya Jagtap. I will be your faculty for our discussion for the ANUBHAV test. So, the verbal discussion, verbal passages in today's CSAT ANUBHAV paper we'll be discussing. So, I just want to preface all of this with a broad analysis of the paper in the sense that how many questions are to be expected. So, we had 25 questions. We can expect around 25 questions, give or take a few more. Sometimes UPSC has asked 27, uh, around 29 questions. Although in recent years it has been between 25 and 27. So as you can see, we have kept it at the exam level. In fact, 25 is very accurate according to 2020, 21, and 22 patterns. All right. Now, the division or the breakup of these questions we can see as assumption questions. Six assumption type questions have been asked. 12 inference type questions have been asked. Reasoning based questions, which is sort of further application type questions. Three of those have been asked. Simple, straightforward, fact based questions are three, and main point question we can say there's one main point question. So this approach as well, is quite close to the kind of questions that are asked uh, by UPSC in the actual exam. So we have stayed true to the original, so as to speak. Uh, Also, apart from this, the level of difficulty of the questions I would like to discuss. This breakup of questions especially is useful for those students who are relying completely or partially on passages to bring in their marks. So this can tell you which areas are your strengths, which areas are your weaknesses, and you can work towards these areas and so on and so forth. Okay, so now let me just discuss the level of difficulty in terms of very difficult questions. I'll say two to three questions can be categorized as such. The rest of the questions, say around 22 questions, we should all of us should hope to solve those questions or can hope to solve those questions. I'll discuss in detail. Okay. Now, I would also like to highlight the overall approach. This is the approach that I teach in class at Next IAS, and this is the approach that is going to help us bring in most, achieve highest accuracy in terms of the passage. So, for the passage based question, a lot of times students think of this as a subjective thing, meaning my understanding and your understanding of the passage would be different. And that leads to conflict and indecision in the exam. What we want to do is we want to be decisive. So, the evidence based approach means that whatever decision we take in the paper, right? So, this is the passage, and these are the options. Whatever decision we take in the paper should be based on actual words in the passage or the option. So, it should not be just based on a description created by my mind or something like that. It should be the actual words used by the author or the examiner that will drive my decision. Okay. We start every passage by identifying the main point of the passage, right? As you can see here, we identify the main point. Each passage will have a main point, or we can say the intention of the author. The clearer our understanding of this, the higher our accuracy, right? And the third point, of course, we can't really select an option. We need to eliminate our way to that answer choice. UPSC will create options which are conflicting, some options which are slightly better than the other. So we need to be evaluative. We can't simply select an option. All right. Uh, okay. So let's get started with the questions. Now, for each of these passages or each of these sets of passages, you'll get this uh, directions, or you'll get these diagrams which will include the number of questions and the number of passages. Okay, so students who are, like I said, relying totally on verbal, this will tell you how much time this is going to take. Those of you who are relying partially on passages can maybe skim through and decide which to solve, which not to solve, as you already probably do. Okay, so this four passages, four items, this we can expect to take somewhere around 7 minutes after practicing. Some of you may even do it quicker. Right now, even if you are taking 10 minutes for it, it's fine, but you need to practice and at least achieve something in between, somewhere around 8 minutes. Okay. Now, also, before we proceed, as you can see here, I'll just show you. The first question is a inference question. Always remember, always remember that in the verbal section of CSAT, whenever you look at a passage, you also look at what the question is asking, right? This works only for short passages. If a passage has four questions, if one passage has four questions, it does not. But usually, UPSC will give us a passage with two questions or three questions at most. So remember that you read what the question is asking before you read the passage. So in this case, an inference, if you notice, the first question here was an inference question. All right. So also along the way today, I'll just briefly, very briefly, try and cover what inferences are, what assumptions are. So for inference, I want you to remember a very simple example. Suppose all of us step out of our homes and we see water in streets everywhere, and we see dark clouds in the sky, right? These are two facts we see. So putting these two facts together, we can infer a new fact, or we can conclude a new fact, that it has rained. Fact C is it has rained. So an inference requires some piece of evidence, maybe one evidence, maybe two, maybe three pieces of evidence, using which we reach a fresh conclusion. If you notice, this conclusion of it raining could not have been achieved just using one of these facts. We needed both put together to say it has rained. Right? Suppose we didn't know it has rained, you saw water in the streets and dark clouds. Then step three, you would infer that it has rained. So you're putting two facts together and you're concluding a new fact. That is an inference. All right. An assumption would be, let's say A tells B, go to the market and buy vegetables. All right. So here now a valid assumption would be B knows the way to the market, right? There could be multiple valid assumptions, but this is particularly a valid assumption because the the passage or the original statement is saying go to the market. This tells me that the market is one specific market that B knows about, right? B knows what the market is. That particular market which the speaker is pointing to, correct? So B knows the market is a valid assumption, right? Okay, so these are just basic examples of inference and assumption that I wanted to keep in mind before we start with the questions. So let's get started with the questions. If we need to come back to the slide of inference and assumption, we'll do so. Okay. Now, like I said, before we start every passage, we read that passage, and our objective is to come up with the main point of the passage. Just keep this idea in mind. So here, just read the words that I've marked in green. That will help you quickly grasp the main point of the author. Seed is a necessary component for food, development of food. Emerging technologies like genome editing, using this, seeds can be improved. India will need to adopt these. The author is not mincing his or her words. The author is being direct in the recommendation. India will need to adopt these if it intends to increase its output in the future. All right, so this is pretty much what the author is trying to say. This is the intention of the author. Now, using these facts, the examiner is expecting us to identify a valid inference. All right, which of these is a valid inference? So let's see. Genetically modified foods alone, like option A says, genetically modified foods alone will help India make strides towards nutrition and food security. So obviously, as you can see, this is marked in red. Uh, this is especially problematic because we don't find any evidence where we can say that only genetically modified foods will help India progress towards food security. This we can't find any evidence for. India will need to adopt these if it intends to increase its output. If it intends to increase its output. So India will need to adopt does not mean that genetically modified foods only will help India make strides. Maybe apart from these, we also need other technologies, other things as well. Okay. Now, option B says the use of technology in the field of agriculture, okay, and genetically modified food can help India transform its agroeconomy. So, like I had mentioned at the start, maybe we can say there are two or three questions which are really difficult. I would include this in one of those, especially because of option B. All right, if you notice, the use of technology in genetically modified food, this is acceptable because this is discussed in the passage, right? Let me just clear all of this. So here our problem was only, correct? Here, our problem is not the genetically modified food, which is already mentioned in the passage. Our problem is the use of technology in the field of agriculture. This is not exactly matching the information provided here, where technology is discussed from the point of view of seeds and genome editing, not agricultural technologies. Like, for example, not making better combine harvesters, but we're discussing genome editing, right? Also, the other thing is will help India transform its agroeconomy. We have not really discussed the economy of agriculture in the passage. We've discussed India will need to meet some increased demand in the future, but we have not really discussed the agroeconomy, right? So this would also be erroneous. So both of these become incorrect because of the words marked in red. Now, option D, India must continue to use new technologies to protect crops from devastating pests, pathogens, and reduce dependence on pesticides. The reason why an option like D is created because UPSC will ask so many questions related to agriculture, etc. One of the passages may refer to pests and pathogens. We might get confused. But in this passage, there is no reference to any of these, so these are incorrect. C is the correct choice to meet future demand. If you notice, all of these words we can find evidence for. Like I said, inferences are based on finding two pieces of evidence and then concluding something new. So, to meet future demand, if it intends to increase output for future, this means future demand will increase. India must emphasize the role of technology. So, technologies like this, India will need to adopt these to enhance production of food grains, again to increase its output with limited resources. All right. So option C is the correct choice for this question. Some of you may have gone with B, but this in the field of agriculture and agroeconomy especially make option B incorrect. Okay. Now let's look at the next passage. In the beginning of photography, black and white camera film was sensitive to blue light, but not to red light. Okay, so something specific about black and white camera film of the old days, पुराना camera film, उसके बारे में कोई fact बता रहा है author. All right, so the film could not capture blue sky because it's very sensitive to blue light. It could not capture the blue sky. So to balance this out, to make up for this, photographers would apply a red filter. They would use a red filter. All right, this pretty much covers the main point of the author. So to capture a blue sky, to capture a blue sky, a red filter would be required, right? And this is in black and white photography. All right, let's look at the question here. We are being tested on assumptions. What is the most logical assumption that can be made from the passage? All right, so let's look at option A. Red filters were very popular in the old days of photography. If you notice, we can't really determine whether it's very popular or not. We don't find any evidence to suggest the popularity of red filters. Red filters were used to capture blue images, but we can't say they're very popular. Infrared rays are invisible to the naked eye. This may be a standalone fact as it is, but it's not discussed in the passage at all, right? So option A and B are incorrect. We can categorize option B as beyond scope of the passage. Okay. Then option C, black and white photography used to be in the past, it used to be very popular. Again, we can't determine its popularity if it's increasing, if it's decreasing, right? We can't really determine that from the passage. So A, B, and C are incorrect. Option D is the correct choice. We'll find evidence for it. Red filters cut out some of the blue light. It's sensitive to blue light, right? Uh, Black and white film is sensitive to blue light, and black and white film, therefore, is filtered using a red filter to then reduce that. So, red filters cut out or reduce some of the blue light on black and white film. So, option D is the correct choice. All right. Okay. By the way, those of you who want to pause in between, reread the passage because your reading of the passage may be slightly different. I want you to be as as specific and as precise about your selection of words, so you know exactly what the main point of the author is, and that way, it's your decisions are not based on vague descriptions. This will lead to errors. We want to be as precise as possible. So do pause and take a look at what you have read the passage as, and take a look at what you have read the options as. Okay. Now, this is a very simple passage. This is just describing what desktop publishing is. Desktop publishing uses computers to produce documents. Now, in this industry of desktop publishing, planning is most crucial of any project. Any project is actually a very strong word or phrase, right? Any tells us the strength of the author's idea that this will apply to all DTP projects. So to plan, the author is saying a clear understanding of your target audience, message you want to convey, and the format. Right? These factors are required to be efficient about your DTP project. In short, okay. So just a general passage. UPSC will always once in a while throw a passage at us, which is just informative about some industry or something like that. Uh, Here the paragraph best supports. So paragraph best supports is basically paragraph में किस चीज का evidence है, right? So this is basically an inference question, okay, asked in a slightly different way. Now, let's look at this. Option A says desktop publishing is one way to become acquainted, to get to know. Acquainted is to get to know a new business, right? So this does not make sense. The author is talking about getting a clear understanding of your target audience. This does not mean a new business. So we don't find evidence for this. Option A is invalid. It's an invalid inference or invalid conclusion based on the passage. Computer software is being continually refined. This may be true, but not discussed in the passage. Nowhere is the rate of change in the software discussed in the passage. So option B is incorrect. Option D says the planning stage of any DTP project, this is acceptable because it's used in the passage, should include talking with the intended audience. See, this phrase is incorrect because we are told, and many students I feel would have gone with option D. A clear understanding of your target audience is needed. This is correct, right? But this does not necessarily have to come from talking, right? This may include surveys, right? YouTube pay, you'll find YouTube does surveys. So similarly, this may include surveys. So we can say the planning stage of any DTP project should include is very strong. Should means it's 100. It's a strong recommendation. Include speaking with the intended audience. This is an invalid inference. We can't say speaking. It can say, suppose this was may include interacting. This could be better, but we can't definitely say it includes interacting. A clear understanding can also be gathered by analyses of your competitors and so on and so forth. So this may include interacting slightly better than should include talking. I just want to explain that. But the clear correct choice is the first stage of any proposed DTP project should be organization and design. Organization design planning is most crucial of any DTP. The first stage comes from the words prior to starting. You should have a clear understanding of target audience, message, and format. So, organization and design. Option C is the correct answer choice. All right. Let's see the next one. Now, this is something that UPSC will frequently ask polity related passages, civics related passages, so on and so forth. But this is especially polity related. Supreme Court has ruled that the state has the burden in proving that it has behaved within the bounds of the law, not compromised the rule of law. So the state has to prove that it is following rule of law. It's the burden is on the state to show that they are following rule of law. You may have heard that a judge will often throw out a case against a hardened criminal also because the process of gathering evidence was not up to the mark. So that's again violation of rule of the law. So the state has to prove that rule of the law is being followed. The strict legal requirements that must be completed in order to deprive a person of their property, right? There certain requirements must be undertaken by the state. Only if those are followed can you deprive a person of their property. All right. The first question we discussed, the inference question, was a difficult question. I think this also is a little difficult question because of the options. We'll just see why. Which of the following is the most logical corollary? Corollary is which, let's say, which follows the logic of the passage. All right, which follows the logic of the passage. Let's look at option A. The dispossession of a person's private property following due process of law. So if you dispossess private property following due process of law, it violates their right. This is incorrect, right? There is no violation of the right. There is no violation of the right if process of law is followed. So violates their right makes option A incorrect. Option B, no state will evade its legal responsibility towards those from whom their private property is expropriated. Expropriated is just taken away. All right. Now, no state will evade is very strong because this means not just India, but any state, right? Pakistan, Bangladesh, any other state, right? Iran, whether they have what the world generally will call rule of law or not, no state will evade. So this is very extreme. We're just discussing all countries in general. Option B is incorrect. Option C, lack of legal authority for deprivation of property is a criminal offense. This what uh, kind of offense it is if a state does not has compromised rule of law. What kind of offense it is not discussed in the passage. So we can't use outside information. If you notice, the instructions say that our answer should be based on information in the passage only. Since he is incorrect, criminal offense is not discussed in the passage. We can't, it does not logically follow. Now, option D sounds very strong. It is strong. Nobody can be deprived of liberty or property. Nobody means no person can be deprived of liberty or property. This, uh, like I said, this question is difficult. This we can only approach using elimination. We know none of the other options follow. Option D follows. But why does option D follow? We'll see that shortly. So I wanted to just follow this process for a moment. Based on the last sentence of the passage, the strict legal requirements that must be completed in order to deprive a person of their property. So person X cannot be deprived without following the rule of law. Therefore, person X cannot be deprived of liberty or property, right? Therefore, nobody can be deprived. So we can say based on this that person X के लिए if rule of law is not followed, this applies. So person X cannot be deprived of liberty of property, and therefore nobody can be deprived. No such person can be deprived. Now, obviously, one of the reasons this option is little difficult is to make it fully logical, we should say nobody can be deprived of liberty or property unless due rule of law or due process, rule of law would be more accurate, unless rule of law is followed. Now, conveniently, the examiner has skipped on these words to make the question more difficult. If these words would be there, then it would be very easy, right? Conveniently, these words have been removed. So questions like these will especially test our ability to eliminate, right? And the more clear your decisions for elimination are, uh, the higher your accuracy. All right, here D is the answer. You can you can pause at this slide and then again reread this part. Okay, now the next set of questions. Let's, like I was saying here, your answers should be based on the passages only, right? Don't use your knowledge, outside information, paper one knowledge, etc. Now, the first passage here, understanding different approaches to establishing more compatible legal frameworks, right? You want to make your laws more compatible. So, and more inclusive. So this will help trade and this will help online commerce. So this passage is talking in context to data regulation, right? So how do we have a legal framework to regulate data, right? So the first goal should be to ensure rights of individuals, right? Digital latecomers, countries who have come late to the digital age, have the advantage of learning from mistakes. From whoever came first, उनके गलतियों से सीखना है. So we'll learn from the mistakes of those who came prior. While the latter are only belatedly beginning to introduce protection of such rights. So latter meaning digital latecomers is discussed here. So latter would be the people who started digital revolution are only belatedly, only recently beginning to introduce protection of such rights. Developing countries have the possibility to build a digital economy with better privacy because we have a fresh start. If we consider that now we are no longer developing from the point of view of digital data protection and so on and so forth, we already have those laws in place. But the idea is that since we are starting a little later, we can learn from the mistakes of those who came before and we can have better data protection laws. This will help establish a more compatible legal framework and this will facilitate more trade and commerce. Okay, let's look at the question. On the basis of the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. We're looking for assumptions. Here, statement one, though developed countries established data protection systems much before. If you notice, we are told there are digital latecomers, countries who are late to this sort of digital revolution, and there are countries who have started this digital revolution. But we don't know what the time frame is. Much before will tell us it's vague. We don't even know, let's say, developed versus developing, right? We don't know the time frame in terms of the digital divide. What is the time frame? Is it 10 years? Is it 15 years? Is it 20 years? Can we say much before? Can we not say much before? So this we don't have any evidence for. One is invalid. The second is a data regulation system which prioritizes the rights of individuals will promote international trade. What we have learned from the previous questions is will promote suggests that this definitely will, right? And if you notice, the passage says uh, is important for facilitating more trade, right? Important for facilitating is different from will achieve more trade, right? So will achieve or will promote makes it incorrect. So the correct choice here is D. Neither of these assumptions are valid. All right. Frequently asked by UPSC, many times the option turns out to be D. This is the case. We can't really. That does not mean we can't. We can leap to a conclusion, but D could be the choice. Let's see the next question. We are risking the future of the planet. The ways to control these risks. We are talking from the point of view of climate change. The ways to control these risks uh, and what the costs are to control these risks and who should pay the cost. You will all be used to this climate change debate by now. Who will bear the cost? So, tackling climate change concerns risks, costs, and ethics. Three of these factors, and all should be at the heart of an analysis of an effective, equitable global deal. Basically, अगर कोई भी global deal बिठाना है, if every all parties should sit at the table and discuss this in a realistic way, it should be equitable. right? Risks, costs, and ethics should be equitably distributed amongst members. Okay. So, crucial message is basically main point of the author. This question was very common in 2023. We can expect that maybe this year for 2024 they'll ask fewer of these questions because last time UPSC asked an overwhelming number of these questions. So they'll always keep this, floating. So let's look at the options. Option A says to formulate an effective global deal. Uh, an in-depth analysis of the factors involved is required. Now, main point means whatever the author's main point was, that has to be interpreted in the option. So if we are to reduce the main point, we would say that tackling climate change involves risks, costs, ethics, and equitable distribution of those. Right? So let me just clear the rest. So if we were to mark the main point in the passage, it would look something like this, what I've circled. Okay, so if you notice in-depth analysis of the factors involved, this is not exactly accurate. This is vague, unclear. Unclear what in-depth analysis actually means. Now, studying the relationship between risks and costs is at the heart of any real climate assessment. Now, studying the relationship between risks and costs. This relationship between risks and costs is not enough. We need to say who bears the cost, who will pay. This is not addressed. So, part of the crucial message, a part of the main point was this deal has to be equitable, not captured by option B. So, the main point is not captured by options A and B. Let's look at option D. The economics of climate change need to be addressed. Now, economics of climate change, just like in the first question, agroeconomy was mentioned. Economics of climate change have not been discussed here, correct? So we can't say economics of climate change need to be addressed. This would again be a vague main point. So the crucial message is global policy to mitigate the risks of climate change. So if you notice, I'm just clearing all the markings. Mitigate risks of climate change is like we're marked tackling climate change must be focused on ethical distribution of costs. Ethical distribution of costs, this captures equitable global deal and ethical global deal. Risks are already mentioned here and costs are mentioned here. So option C best captures the main point of the author. C is the correct choice. Okay. Now here this passage is about banking reforms and comparing banking reforms between private sector banks, public sector banks, and foreign banks. We'll see this passage to increase effectiveness of financial intermediation process. Basically, to increase effectiveness of banks, India's banking system underwent change. Banks would boost their performance by utilizing shifting operating environment, basically using digital economy, right? Banks would boost their performance. The Reserve Bank started a framework which basically was to create a competitive environment for different banks. Now, if you examine the reforms, if you see what the quality of reforms or what the outcome of reforms was, based on efficiency of banks, public sector banks and private sector banks in India were similar. They did not differ much. But foreign banks outperformed Indian banks. So foreign banks were better than Indian banks when it came to financial intermediation or banking in short. Okay, let's see the question here. We're being asked to draw a valid inference. Let's look at option A. By the way, these words really don't play any role. In case they do, I'll bring it up. But in 99% of your questions, you are essentially interested in just this word. So, banking sector reforms in India were introduced to give more employment opportunities to educated unemployed. More employment not discussed anywhere in the passage, so no evidence. Option A is incorrect. Educated unemployed also not discussed similarly. B, downtrodden masses were excluded, right? Again, not mentioned from the banking sector, so option B is incorrect. D says giving a better return to the central government was the major reason behind banking sector reforms. right? Major reason behind banking sector reforms is increase effectiveness of financial intermediation. This paying money to central government, वगैरह, this is not discussed in the passage at all. So we can't really claim that it's about that. So C is the correct choice. There is a discernible difference. Discernible difference is noticeable difference. Noticeable because it can be measured, right? Examined or measured. It can be examined or measured in metrics, in the efficiency parameters of Indian and foreign banks. So option C is the correct choice. There is a noticeable difference in Indian and foreign banks when it comes to efficiency metrics. Okay, let's see the next one. The highly fragmented nature of laws affecting the protection of data security. Again, we are discussing data security. We just discussed it. Passages often repeat in theme in the exam. So, nature of laws affecting data security and protection of data and cross-border flow of data, right? So, what to do about this fragmented nature of laws? So, because of these fragmented nature of laws, there is uncertainty about which rules apply. कौन से rules कहाँ लागू होंगे, we don't know, right? So, regional or global policies may be needed. Author is recommending this to avoid this fragmentation. We may need regional or global policies. So, direct recommendation is made by the author may be needed. And this will help include competition, taxation, and trade, etc. So, there will be other associated benefits also apart from just protecting data. To find suitable solutions, it will require effective international collaboration. So the collaboration has to be effective. It should not be ineffective. So again, like that previous thing about equitable global deal, this also needs to involve all parties. It needs to involve dialogue and full involvement of developing countries. So we can summarize the main point as to avoid this fragmented nature of data laws and the uncertainty about them. A regional or global policy may be needed. This policy, to make this policy, it will require effective collaboration, right? Not ineffective collaboration, but effective collaboration. All right. So let's look at the assumptions. Which of these could be valid assumptions, invalid assumptions? Statement one, establishing a single global overarching framework. I suspect many students would have marked one also as valid. A single global overarching framework has not been discussed. Regional or global policies. So this just is opposite of, or it flies in the face of a single global overarching framework. This has not been discussed. ठीक है, तो एक option one is invalid. Option two, a regional and global data security policy should include sufficient flexibility to satisfy all countries. Okay. Now, this phrase to satisfy all countries might seem problematic, but we'll determine it. We'll see if we can infer it. Finding suitable solutions will require effective international collaboration. So, effective international collaboration. International collaboration here is talking about international collaboration in general, meaning applicable to all, and should include sufficient flexibility is because it should be effective and it should have full involvement of all countries. So B is the correct choice for question number 13. B is a valid assumption. All right. Now let's look at the next set of questions. Here we have, this is just a factual passage. This is telling us some story about the British interaction with China and so forth. Macartney visited court of Chinese emperor to establish an embassy. So Chinese emperor ने उसको भगा दिया. Chinese emperor was like, he was swatted away by the Chinese emperor. Chinese emperor said, we have a lot of money, we don't need you. A third of the world's GDP belong to China. Okay, so we have not the slightest need of your country's manufacturers. The attempts at reform in China in the 1830s were met with failure. So China tried to reform itself in the 1830s. It was met with failure. Ultimately, Maoism took over in China, and the British returned with gunboats to force commerce. So this is telling the story of China and British interaction and how China tried to reform itself, and whether it achieved it or not, we don't know. Ultimately, Maoism came and British returned with gunboats. We don't know whether China achieved ultimate reform today is because we can't use information outside, right? We are told here answers should be based on passages only. This will be important, especially for this question, because let me just clear this. Because here option one says the Chinese were a superpower in the 18th century. This is a valid inference because if you notice, this is just a factual question, by the way. Which of these is are correct is asked. But A would be a valid inference if only this part was mentioned. Correct? Because we are saying that a third of the world's GDP belong to China. So that's a significant chunk. They could be called a superpower. But a position they have reclaimed today. This is beyond scope of passage. Like I said, one phrase that I wanted to remember is when you mark something and that has no evidence in the passage is beyond scope of the passage. So it's invalid. And two says after British insurgents, China was forced to enter Maoism. Forced to enter Maoism is anyways incorrect. If you notice, attempts at reform were met with failure and ultimately Maoism. Ultimately Maoism, this means they chose the philosophy of Maoism, right? Forced to enter Maoism is incorrect. Also, the verb here, if you want to be accurate also about the phrase, the verb should not be enter, it should be forced to adopt. So, for multiple reasons, statement 2 is invalid. The correct choice is option D, right? Fairly easy question. Now, this is, you'll often get these science-based passages, something to do from nature, something to do from physics. In this case, we are looking at some research about antifreeze proteins. These proteins, AFPs, we'll call them, it makes it AFPs, let some fish, ice fish, live in seas as cold as -2 degrees. So, ये proteins की वजह से those fish survive, lowering the freezing point. Now, using these ice fish AFPs, rat hearts have been kept at very low temperatures, right? Below zero, using ice fish AFPs. So if we just read the words in green, AFPs let Antarctic ice fish live in seas as cold as -2 degrees. And rat hearts have been kept alive using ice fish antifreeze proteins. Okay. Now, which of the following statements is correct? A simple fact-based question. Let's look at A. There about, and this is facts about Antarctic ice fish with regards to Antarctic ice fish. So their bodily fluids cannot freeze in seas as cold as -2 degrees Celsius. So we haven't gone beyond -2. We don't know what happens at -3, -4, -5, etc. Right? So cannot freeze would be invalid. They cannot survive in warm temperatures. Again, in warm temperatures, it's not being discussed whether they survive or not. So B would be invalid. AFPs found in catfish are solution to preserving organs. This means this would help us preserve organs. For solution would mean first there's a problem in preserving organs, which also we can't really infer from the passage. And therefore we have found the solution, which also we can't infer from the passage. So C is we can't even consider it a fact, we can't consider it a valid inference. Option C is incorrect. D is the correct choice. They, meaning ice fish, have been part of medical research because we know that they survive up to -2 degrees. Clearly, some medical research has taken place on them. D is the correct choice. Also, that they have been used in uh, preserving rat hearts. So, D is the correct choice. Okay. Now, this was a slightly long passage. We can expect maybe 2 to 3 long passages in the exam, and each passage we can expect it to have 2 to 3 questions. This is about neurotransmitters. I wanted to pause and read this passage, just reading the words marked in green. We're talking the role that neurotransmitters play, sending messages. There's still much that scientists don't understand about neurotransmitters. Then two types of neurotransmitters are discussed. One is serotonin. The roles played by serotonin, crucial for controlling sleep, mood, hunger, muscular contractions. The other neurotransmitter is norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is discussed from point of view of alertness, mental attention, flight or fight response. and only when both are awake are these released in large amounts. Now, what happens to neurotransmitters during sleep? Right? During sleep, they're less active. Now, there are some stages of sleep. Non-REM stages may they are non-REM stages are not associated with normal dreaming, typically not associated with normal dreaming. Fourth stage REM is strongly associated with dreaming. During this stage, neurotransmitters drop to zero. So the number of neurotransmitters in our brain will be at zero, close to zero in the fourth stage. If you notice, I'm not really trying to analyze the information. I'm just taking the information in this passage, especially at face value, because often we don't know this information. So we just have to treat it as facts and then sort of sift through those facts when we see those questions. Let's look at the questions. Reread the passage, like I said, just in the words marked in green if you need to. Okay. So according to the passage, serotonin plays a role in. So this is a factual question about serotonin. So it's a fact-finding exercise. So you just go to the passage and say serotonin does A, B, C, D. Right? Now, alertness and mental focus is norepinephrine, right? Alertness, etc. So again, alertness is norepinephrine, and mood and mental focus, these are also norepinephrine. So only A, sleep and appetite. So option A is the correct choice. Simple factual question. So after going through such a taxing passage, we can expect a simple factual question at the end of it. Not always, but at least in this case, there was one. The passage implies solve implication questions as inferences. Unless you have evidence, you can't consider it a valid implication. Okay. One enters the fourth stage of sleep only after passing through the first three stages, meaning sleep happens after stage one is complete, stage two is complete, stage three is complete, and then stage four. This flow of logic has not been discussed in the passage. Only after is therefore incorrect. No mention of this. Now, parasomnia such as sleepwalking, confusion, arousals don't occur during the fourth stage of sleep. Again, this don't occur during fourth stage of sleep with regards to these fundas. बहुत ऐसे फंडे यूपीएससी will give or any passage can have. तो ये फंडे we don't have to take these words कि इनका मतलब मुझको पता नहीं है तो what should I do with this information? Even if you don't understand their meaning, take them at face values and these concepts, whether they occur or don't occur, I need to find. The meaning of these concepts is not asked, correct? So I can't say based on the passage that they don't occur, right? So this would be incorrect. And option D, neurotransmitter levels fluctuate rapidly. If you notice, they drop virtually to zero during the fourth stage, right? So fluctuate rapidly would be incorrect. They don't fluctuate rapidly. So option C is the correct choice. Normal dreaming occurs more frequently during the fourth stage of sleep than the first three. Now, how can I make this comparison occurs more frequently? And this is why it's an implication or an inference, right? The non-REM stages are typically not associated with normal dreaming. Just read these two facts which I'm marking in red in the passage. Non-REM are not typically associated with normal dreaming. Fourth stage is strongly associated with dreaming. So putting fact, let's call this fact A and fact B. If we put these two facts together, which is why I was calling this an inference question, we get fact C, which is normal dreaming, therefore occurs more frequently during the fourth stage. Okay. So C is the correct choice here. Let's see the next one. Now two passages, four items. So एक passage लंबा हो सकता है. So this is the first passage. This is a simple passage. You may have read a similar passage in GS. Urea sales and fertilizer pollution we discuss very frequently while reading newspapers, so it would have come up. Sales of urea is the primary cause of worsening plants. I'm just oversimplifying here. And sale of urea is primary cause of worsening plant, and sale of urea is at an all-time high. These two facts about sales of urea. have been discussed. Urea is the primary polluter, we'll say, and it's also at an all-time high. Farmers are over applying urea, even though there is clear evidence of declining good things. So plants decline, even though there is clear evidence, farmers are still over applying urea. Now, the reason for this is simple. MRP of urea has remained unchanged. A lot of facts are given. Of course, in fact से कोई question बनेगा तो we would have to go to the passage and check one by one कि 5628 ठीक से लिखा है क्या 27,000 ही लिखा है कि नहीं. But UPSC this time, let's say, or in this test, we have not used that. UPSC does not always ask these number-based facts. Sometimes they will, as you'll know, based on paper one questions. So I've read these facts, but I've overlooked them and I've come to the next part. Various solutions currently offered skirt the real issue, which is overuse from underpricing. तो ऑथर का आर्ग्यूमेंट सिंपल है यूरिया ऑल टाइम हाई यूसेज क्यों है बिकॉज अंडर प्राइसिंग राइट जस्ट दीज थ्री सर्कल्स अंडर प्राइसिंग क्यों है यूरिया हैज कंटिन्यूड टू बी अ पॉलिटिकल हॉट पोटैटो मतलब किसी को भी ये हैंडल नहीं करना no one wants to handle this problem they are just transferring the problem to other people so urea has continued to be a political hot potato okay. Now let's draw assumptions from this. Let's look at A. Farmers are not interested. Farmers को interest ही नहीं है in improving soil. This has not been discussed in the passage. So option A is therefore invalid. I can't say farmers are not interested. ठीक है. Option D, increasing the price of urea will automatically reduce its overuse. The reason why I'm going to option D is many students, again, I suspect, have gone with option D. If I reduce the price of urea, let's say MRP of urea is reduced. If I, sorry, MRP of urea is increased, not reduced, increased. So let's say 5,600 से हमने इसका प्राइस कर दिया 7,000. इस इंक्रीज से तो ऑटोमेटिकली कुछ चेंज नहीं होगा because if you see the comparison of costs, the MRPs of everything else very high compared to urea. तो ये चेंज से तो कुछ ऑटोमेटिकली होगा नहीं so increasing the price of urea will automatically reduce its overuse is incorrect right overuse will only be reduced after competitive pricing of all products is done so that is not discussed and I can't say will automatically reduce so D is incorrect A is incorrect C alternative fertilizers are ineffective effectiveness of fertilizers तो यहाँ पे डिस्कस ही नहीं है ओवरऑल इफेक्टिवनेस का इनफैक्ट ओवरऑल नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट ऑफ फर्टिलाइजर्स डिस्कस हुआ ठीक है तो सी वी कांट कंपेयर ऑल्टरनेटिव फर्टिलाइजर्स फ्रॉम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू ऑफ इफेक्टिवनेस ऑप्शन डी इज द करेक्ट चॉइस द गवर्नमेंट्स पॉलिसीज ऑन यूरिया प्राइसिंग आर इन्फ्लुएंस्ड बाय political considerations because it's a political hot potato no party really wants to address it it's a problematic thing that addressing it is a real problem. So option B is the correct choice. All right. Remember to restrict your answers to the passage only. Just use information from the passage. Now we'll make inferences from the passage. We'll see which of these are valid. One says the use of urea is the primary cause of declining nitrogen use efficiency and crop yield response. So primary cause of worsening uh, plant nutrient imbalance and deteriorating soil health. And this when there is clear evidence that nitrogen use efficiency and crop yield response will also decline, right? So both of these facts are mentioned, both meaning this set, this is one negative impact and clear evidence that this set, nitrogen use and this also will decline. Option one is a valid, statement one is a valid inference. Statement two, alternative fertilizers again are required in much lesser not discussed. This comparison has not been made. 2 is invalid. 3. Price of urea has not been increased for a long time. This is very simple. This is discussed in the passage over and over again. And 4. Diesel costs are no longer a political hot potato. So diesel costs are easy to manage. Everyone manages them easily. Everyone meaning each government that follows since the start of India has managed diesel costs easily. This we can't say from the passage, right? So 2 and 4 would be invalid. 1 and 3 are valid. You can always use the key to solve this question faster, but I'm just going based on evidence, so I want to discuss each option. Here, D is the correct choice for question number 32. This is based on set C. All right. Let's look at this question. Based on the passage, what could be long-term consequences of continued overuse of urea? We'll call this a reasoning-based question. Using logic in the passage, we need to reason out what could be the next stage. So if there is continued overuse, improved soil health तो नहीं होगा. Soil health changes मतलब क्या changes? Better होगा या worse होगा? So this is vague. Soil health changes is vague. So C is incorrect. Some students I suspect have gone with C, but change मतलब किस type का change? Is it improving or is it declining? We can't see. So A and C are invalid, and D, improve nitrogen use efficiency. ये improve तो नहीं होगा, right? So D is invalid. B is the correct choice. Decreased crop yields and worsened soil health. This we can find from the first part of the passage. Fairly easy passage. I expect all of you to get all three right in this passage. Let's see the next one. Uh, or at least all of us having the ability to get all three right in this passage. We'll see the next one. Okay. Now, common but differentiated responsibility, we come to the same thing. Climate change, who has what responsibility, which country has what onus on them. So we know this India has to rely on coal plants in the interim because of us being still developing. Also, the true cost of renewable sources is much more than fossil fuel. Okay, West is using natural gas, which is also polluting, correct? And keeps falling short of its commitments to transfer technology and finance. So West is using natural gas, which is polluting. It's not transferring technology, it's not transferring finance. So this is unfair. So eventually the author says coal is a necessary evil. Countries like India have to rely on coal. It's a necessary evil. It is evil, but a necessary evil. Okay. So isme we are again looking for inferences. Let's see which of these is a valid inference. A says renewable energy sources are inexpensive. If you notice, they are much more expensive, right? So inexpensive is incorrect. The cost of renewable energy sources will never be low than fossil fuels. So if you notice यहाँ पे क्या लिखा है? Remains much more, meaning renewable sources का cost remains much more as of today than that of fossil fuel power. Also, if you notice, this entire passage का message is that we should all slowly move towards renewable. मतलब इसका कहना यह है कि in the future renewable sources will be more affordable, so will never be lower is invalid, right? This has not been discussed. This is an invalid inference. This is extreme also. See, the true cost of renewable energy sources is ignored by most countries. Ignored by most countries भी passage में कहीं पे भी कहा नहीं है कि most countries का क्या opinion है about this, what do countries generally feel about CBDR, not discussed. So D is the correct choice. Renewable energy sources can be more cost effective in the long run. They can be more cost effective. That is why the passage is recommending that we should all shift towards them. We are using coal plants in the interim, meaning for a temporary period, for a short duration, we are using coal plants. So we are saying that in the long run, renewable energy sources will be cost effective. D is a valid inference. We are using two facts in the passage. Remains much more than fossil fuel and interim to say that renewable energy sources can be more cost effective in the long run. All right. This was a slightly difficult question only because of option D. These are actually easier to eliminate. Let's look at the next set of passages. Now, here we are discussing the impact of rapid population growth, economic development, urbanization, and this impact on India's ecosystem. This is caused a surge for natural resources. The demand for natural resources is shooting up. Basically. This has put immense pressure on Indian ecosystems. Degradation is happening, biodiversity loss, increased pollution levels. We know this argument. We have read it over and over again in paper one, especially. So, contributing to climate change and exacerbating social and economic inequalities. So, because of these factors, because of the negative impacts and surge in demand and ecosystem degradation, social and economic inequalities occur. To address this, to resolve this, a shift towards sustainable consumption patterns is required. Fairly easy. Let's see the question. Most valid implication, we are looking to draw a conclusion or an inference from the passage. Option A, rapid population growth will worsen, exacerbate means will worsen and perpetuate existing social ills. So perpetuate would mean it will become permanent. तो ये गलत हो गया permanent तो we can't say because the author is saying we can address this problem. मतलब ये जो social inequalities का problem है, this problem of inequalities we can rectify in the future. So perpetuate is incorrect. We can't accept perpetuate. Option C says Indian ecosystems carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is not exactly discussed. Carrying capacity you may know from paper one, which means that an ecosystem has a certain number of organisms which can live off of it. So let's say one ecosystem X, has 100 organisms which can survive off. So that is the carrying capacity. Indian ecosystems carrying capacity cannot match demand. This we can't say because the author is again saying we can address this challenge using sustainable consumption patterns. So we can't say carrying capacity is not there, right? So C is incorrect. D, environmental degradation and biodiversity loss are irreversible. Same ho gaya, perpetuate, irreversible. If you can address this challenge, that means it's not permanent, it's not irreversible. So D is invalid. B is the correct choice. Shifting towards renewable source of uh, resources can help mitigate, reduce social and economic inequalities. This is basically coming from the last two sentences. All right. So option B is the correct choice for question 43. Okay. Now let's see this passage. This is again about, like I said, civics, polity sort of, but an opinion passage. Here, independence must mean that of the people. Independence must begin at the bottom. Thus, every village must become a republic or panchayat having full powers. Every village has to be self-sustained. And then the author, so essentially this is a little extreme, but we understand the tenor of the passage, what the passage is trying to imply, that every village should be one complete unit, a microcosm in itself. It can self-sustain and it can defend against the world. Okay. So let's look at the question most supported. Most supported again means make a conclusion based on information in the passage, which is basically an inference. Okay. Now, option D, villages in India should rely on external support. It should be self-sustained. So invalid, right? Independence should begin at the top. So it should begin at the bottom. So again, invalid. Ruling over people is necessary, invalid. Independence begins at the bottom. So every village in India should have full powers and become self-sustained. This is a very easy question. I expect all of us to get this right. A is the correct choice. Now, this is talking about the impact of steel and cement. They are important for construction, but they are also heavy emitters, right? So, making decarbonizing of these industries is a priority. Then we are told the degree of impact, a quarter of greenhouse emissions, a big part of the share comes from mining and transportation, etc., etc., etc. Right? So, impact of steel and cement is discussed. Now, let's make an inference here. Construction industry is not important for reducing. Incorrect ho gaya. In fact, the impact of construction industry is huge, is discussed in the passage. Impact of GHG emissions on mining is undeniable. Okay, the impact of greenhouse emissions on mining is undeniable. Again, I suspect a few students to have gone with B. If you notice, the cause effect relationship has been changed. Cause was, uh, let's say, just a moment. Cause was mining emission, and effect was negative impact. Passage option B में that has been inverted, वो change उल्टा कर दिया. The impact of greenhouse gas on mining is undeniable. ये उल्टा हो गया. Cause effect relationship invert हो गया. So UPSC does this actually in many questions. You can expect this in at least 3 to 4 questions in the exam. One of the options will have cause effect relationship ulta. Okay, so option B is incorrect. Let's look at C. The steel and cement used in construction must be replaced by sustainable material. This is beyond scope of the passage. ये mentioned नहीं है. D is the correct choice. The steel and cement industries are significant contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. A very easy option, option D, provided we don't fall into any traps. So remember, elimination is always the best policy, is the only way to be as accurate as possible in the exam. Let's look at the next set of questions. Here, 3 passages, 3 items. The America-based modern technology company, etc., has made AI-enabled bracelets that fit around rhinos' ankles. We have discussed tiger K collar tags. We've discussed other animals being tagged in GS in the newspaper. So here, AI-enabled bracelets around rhinos that will help locate the animals, monitor their behavior in real time. ठीक है? Spot when an animal is exhibiting abnormal movement, and when it's distressed, based on their AI algorithm, when it's distressed, it sends an alert to anti-poaching team. तो डिस्ट्रेस से वो मूवमेंट से समझ लेता है कि शायद पोचर्स है एंड इट विल सेंड अ अलर्ट टू द एंटी पोचिंग टीम. Okay, so we are making an assumption, a valid assumption based on this. Let's look at A. Use of bracelets will obviate the need for traditional conservation. Obviate the need will is trying to say will no longer we will no longer need, उसकी जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी. ट्रेडिशनल मेथड्स, ट्रैकिंग डॉग्स, पेट्रोल टीम्स की जरूरत ही नहीं पड़ेगी. इट विल बी ऑब्विएटेड. ये दिस इज इनवैलिड, बियॉन्ड स्कोप ऑफ द पैसेज. The bracelets and similar such devices significantly reduce the impact of poachers. So yes, significantly reduce is invalid. We don't know how effective this is. Effectiveness actually discuss nahi kiya. Success rate discuss nahi kiya. Also, another problem with option B is bracelets and similar devices. We are discussing one specific bracelet by one specific company, right? So B is also invalid for multiple reasons. B, bracelets can accurately determine exact cause of an animal's abnormal movement patterns. We can't say the exact cause can be determined. If you notice here, we are told companies' algorithms use machine learning to spot when an animal is exhibiting abnormal movement patterns, a signal that it might be distressed. Might be distressed. तो exact cause तो नहीं identify कर लिया. It's possible that there is distress. Correct? So D is incorrect. Option C is the only possible choice. Real-time information about an animal's whereabouts can help us better understand their movement patterns. All right. So option C is the correct choice. It can help us better understand their movement patterns because we can tell when an animal is distressed or not. And then based on this, we can determine whether to send an anti-poaching team or not. So our understanding is improved based on this. So we can say this is a rational assumption because using this bracelet improves our understanding of rhinos being distressed. Therefore, real-time information improves our understanding about movement patterns. C is a valid assumption. All right. Now, this was another difficult question, and this was difficult because of the nature of the language used. So remember that there are three ways in which an examiner can change difficulty of the question or make our lives miserable. Is one is length of sentences. अगर sentence बहुत लंबा होगा तो it's difficult for us to keep track of the subject of the sentence. That makes it a little complicated. The second is difficult words, and the third is new words or terms. कुछ नया ही concept दे दिया, right? Okay. So I want you to read this passage. I'm sure everyone, some of you may have skipped this passage, but those of you who have read the passage, you would have found it a little challenging initially because of the length of the sentence and the sudden change in subject. Here we are talking about whether natural selection can create the I or okay. So just read the sections marked in green. To suppose that the I could have been formed by natural selection seems absurd. मतलब आय इतनी कॉम्प्लेक्स चीज है कि वो नेचुरली बन गई ये थोड़ा इलॉजिकल लगता है वी डोंट बिलीव हाउएवर if we understand कि every modification every change in the I was based on useful things तो वो जो भी यूजफुल चीज है वो अडॉप्ट करते गया आय अडेप्ट करते गया आय एंड इट वेंट ऑन इम्प्रूविंग फिर ये डिफिकल्टी ऑफ बिलीविंग कि दिस आई वाज नेचुरली मेड ये डिफिकल्टी इज हार्डली कैन हार्डली बी कंसिडर्ड रियल मतलब वो डिफिकल्टी नहीं है एक्चुअली अगर आप ये समझ लेंगे कि एट एवरी स्टेज द आई हैज बीन स्लाइटली इंप्रूविंग then a perfect eye can be created as time progresses okay let's look at the I know the passage is a little difficult for us to understand the question is also a little difficult which of the following would the author most likely agree with this is again a reasoning question we can say a further application question. We have discussed all these questions in class at Next IAS, and we actually have a class allocated for very difficult type of questions as well. Okay, so let's go through the options. Option A says the complexity of the eye suggests that it has been created by design. By design implies there is some designer here, right? There was a original design, and then this format has been applied. So this created by design is invalid. The author will not agree with it. The author is saying कि ये naturally बना है. The eye is natural only. Uh, so this idea, difficulty of believing, can hardly be considered real because the eye has formed naturally. So created by design is incorrect. Natural selection can only lead to simple structures. This is incorrect. The author has called the eye as a very complex structure, right? So we can't say that only simple structures can be created. B is incorrect. Variation is always used to an animal. So each change that happens in, let's say, the eye of an animal is always useful. This is incorrect, right? All evolution will choose the best possible change, not any change, correct? So A, B, and C are invalid. D is the correct choice. The doubt whether the eye could have been formed by natural selection is largely misplaced. So option D is what the author will most likely agree with. Option D can also be considered as a summary of the passage. Of course, all the information is not there, but it explains the passage. The doubt that whether the eye could have been formed by natural selection is largely misplaced. There are a few questions which we can say that these could go wrong for me. Like I said, I count three questions in this exam. So the first two are in the first set, and this. The rest of the questions we all can aspire to write. Though two or three questions can go wrong, but it's not necessary that they have to go wrong. These also can be solved by us, provided we do enough practice. Okay, now we're discussing decentralization and the benefits of it, more transparency. All of these I've not marked because this is sort of trite or repeated information. We have gone through that information many times while studying for a paper. However, many initial concerns about decentralization continue to exist. तो क्या initial concerns है? Initial concerns are financial issues, real devolution, genuine representation, etc. But why do they continue to exist? Why are they still in existence? Too often, these issues are dependent on political parties' reluctance to cede power. So the party may not want to cede power or give power to people. So therefore, these issues continue to exist. Okay. So we are looking at assumptions. Which of these could be a valid assumption? Again, stick to just what you've read in the passage. All the reason why I say this is because we have read so much about topics such as decentralization, etc. Kabhi kabhi we'll try and answer something based on our understanding or our knowledge. That would be incorrect. Okay. So all initial concerns have been resolved. ये तो गलत हो गया. In the passage, we are told many initial concerns continue to exist. So opposite of what is stated in the passage. Option B then says civil servants are always able to suggest effective interventions. Again, incorrect. This is extreme. This has not been stated in the passage. And D, any grievance redressal mechanism requires feedback, and this is always beneficial. Feedback is always beneficial. ये passage में discussed नहीं, right? Not discussed in the passage. So D is invalid. The valid assumption that we can make is challenges to decentralization mostly stem from political parties' unwillingness to give up power. Mostly stem from because too often. So therefore, mostly stem from. Right? Baki sara to is a repetition of the last sentence. Fairly easy question. Okay. C is the correct choice for question 55 from set C. Now let's look at this is the last set. Expanding nuclear power production protects the climate. So the author is putting forth an idea. Nuclear power production बढ़ाने से climate can be protected. Hardly there's any carbon emitted. Even Japan, who has gone through some tragedy, 2001 earthquake, wants to return to nuclear power. So the author is saying expanding nuclear power production protects the climate. Even countries who have been at risk are convinced that they want to return to nuclear power. So the benefits of nuclear power, in short, we can best conclude, so we can best infer from the passage. Let's say A, Japan has proved nuclear power is unreliable. This is actually opposite of what the author was trying to communicate. A is incorrect. D, there is a global consensus on use of nuclear. ग्लोबल कंसेंसस होता तो ये आर्गुमेंट ऑथर को देने की जरूरत पड़ती नहीं. सो ग्लोबल कंसेंसस नेवर डिस्कस्ड इन द passage, right? C, increasing the efficiency of nuclear power is the only way. Again, extreme, not discussed in the passage. So B is the correct choice. Expansion of nuclear power production can be beneficial for global climate. All right. Expansion of nuclear power production can be beneficial for global climate. Been the recommendation made by the author. So B is the correct choice. Let's look at the next one. Flash droughts that arrive quickly, more common, are caused by human caused climate change. That's a major reason. We are told the negative impacts of flash droughts, but we already know those. Global warming continues, more abrupt dry spells, so more flash droughts will be caused. Grave consequences are there for people because their livelihoods will be affected. Flash droughts occurred more frequently or more often than slower ones in tropical places. मतलब इन countries में या in regions में fast occurred more than slow. Fast droughts occurred more than slow droughts. All right. So in these regions, let's look at the question. So we're looking for practical implications. One, flash droughts are becoming more common and faster to develop in India. This is because we are told this is arrived quickly. Global warming continues, so more are occurring. So faster, correct? यहाँ तक we have justified faster in India because they happen more frequently in tropical places like India. correct? So this is one practical implication. The other practical implication, and two, we can eliminate A and C here, but I just want us to solve these for now. Of course, you can use the key in the exam and solve these much faster. You just have to check statement 3. If you eliminate A and C, all you need to do is check statement 3. In India, flash droughts occur more often than slower ones as compared to Amazon basin. So if you notice, everything about statement 3 is correct except as compared to Amazon basin. ये comparison, like I said, fast occur more than slow. ये तो passage में discussed है. But India versus Amazon basin, ये passage में discussed नहीं है. So this comparison we cannot make. 3 is invalid. Uh, 2 says flash droughts could have grave consequences for people. We have discussed this in the passage. And 4, man-made climate change, human-caused climate change is a major reason. So 1, 2, and 4 only. Statement 3 is not acceptable. All right. Okay. Let's see. This is the last question. The Reserve Bank is charged with targeting a certain level of inflation by raising interest rates. So inflation is targeted by raising interest rates. Higher interest rates drag down economic growth. तो जितना interest rate बढ़ाते जाओगे उतना economic growth घटता जाएगा. Right? They'll drag down economic growth because loans will become expensive. Interest rate बढ़ा दिया तो a person won't take loan, correct? Because the loan is expensive, आपको ज्यादा interest pay करना पड़े. So economic growth will decrease. RBI hits overall demand, मतलब everyone of us won't take loans, right? So overall demand is hit to bridge the gap. This is expect passages by UPSC about economics logic. It has been done many times in the past. Okay. This passage, however, is fairly simple. Let's see the question. Inferences are expected from this passage, valid inferences. A, RBI uses other tools. We know RBI uses other tools from paper 1, but not from this passage, right? Other tools is incorrect. Higher interest rates in the economy don't have much impact. Don't have much impact, then how does RBI have an impact here? Option B is also invalid based on don't have much impact. RBI only focuses on inflation, doesn't consider other factors. This is not discussed in the passage, right? RBI is charged with targeting inflation. It primarily does this, right? So it doesn't mean that other factors are not considered at all. Option C is invalid. D, for the RBI, controlling demand is to control inflation. This comes from RBI hits overall demand to bridge the gap, right? So controlling demand, therefore, is to control inflation. All right. So with this, we conclude the questions that were asked today. I just want us to remember to, in our approach, be evidence-based, right? Identify the main point of the author and eliminate your way to the answers. There were about 3 questions that we can expect are really difficult, but the rest of the questions all of us can aspire to get. So we discuss all of these things in classes, and I would like all of you to actually look at the solutions and make a comparison and analyze where exactly you went. So with this, I'll bring this discussion to a close. Thank you, everyone.